Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Inter-American Dialogue, and thank you all for joining us this morning. The Inter-American Dialogue, for about a quarter of a century, has devoted a lot of its resources and time and effort to focusing on the education agenda in Latin America and the Caribbean. This has long been one of our priority areas. And in the last couple of years, the program has become particularly dynamic and has, I think, become increasingly part of the debate and discussion, policy discussion, education in Latin America and the Caribbean. One of the strategic challenges that we've identified is precisely to build in the area of skills development as a great challenge for the region. And within that focus and concern of skills development, certainly English language proficiency in the region is very, very important. And a lot of our constituents and colleagues and friends have identified this question as a real bottleneck in terms of improving competitiveness of the region's competitiveness in this global economy. I want to thank particularly Ariel Fishbein, who is the director of our education program, who's provided enormous leadership and intellectual direction to our program and to this particular area of skills development. And Ariel, we're happy to say, joins us today from via Skype from Buenos Aires. So he'll be sharing with us his thoughts and his ideas about this issue that he's focused on so well. I also want to give special thanks to Maria Alexandra Velez of Pearson, who collaborated, supported our work in this area. Maria Alexandra is a great friend, a great partner and colleague of the dialogue, and we're very, very grateful for her support and believing in the importance of this effort. She will, when I conclude, I'll turn it over to her and she'll moderate the session. I also want to mention that this report will be produced in Spanish and is going to be launched in October next month with a series of seminars in Bogota, Lima, Buenos Aires, Panama, and Mexico. So our aim is not only to try to get out some policy ideas, but to try to disseminate them and make them available to people in positions to make decisions, both in the government, private sector, as well as civil society and academia. So that is our purpose of this effort. Let me also thank and congratulate Ariel and Catherine Cronquist, who is with us, who worked at the Dialogue for a while, for this report that we're launching today, English Language Learning in Latin America. And we're happy that Catherine's come back to talk about this report that she's worked so hard on with Ariel. And I also want to thank the other panelists who Maria Alexandra will introduce, but to Denise and Kendra and Mateo, thank you very much for, on behalf of the Dialogue, for coming here this morning and also sharing your perspective on this report. Each one of the panelists is a very clear question to address, and then we'll have an opportunity to open it up for all of your questions and comments, and I'm sure we'll have a very rich, stimulating discussion on a topic that I think hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves. And our hope and expectation is that this report and this session, this launching, and then the Spanish version will help stimulate a good discussion in the region, and we'll try to move towards improving English language proficiency. And I think this is very, very important in the overall context of the region's challenges. So I want to thank Ariel and everybody else, and thank you all for joining us. And then I'll just turn it over to Maria Alexandra, who will take it over. Thank you.
Buenos días. Gracias, Michael. Thank you very much. I know it's hard, at least for me. I had to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I live 2 hours from here. So that tells you how important this issue is for me personally and for Pearson in particular. I would like to start thanking actually Ariel, because I know he's very busy in Buenos Aires and has taken the time to join us via Skype. I'm not going to read the bio of our very wonderful panelists because you all have it in front of you. I just want to say that we have a diverse group of people who have worked very closely in education, particularly in English learning. And I think and I hope this is going to be a very productive discussion. What we would like out of this report is to have people thinking how we can truly increase proficiency in English for Latin America. That is, in a way, a very important lever for the region to become more innovative, more productive, attract more foreign investment, and definitely continue its path to inserting in the global economy. So we have first Catherine Conquest, as Michael said. She was instrumental in doing this report. I worked very closely with her for the last year. Thank you very much. Then I have Denise Laurie. Denise comes from the State Department, and actually I am a Fulbright scholar, so I love the State Department for that. They also helped me improve my English skills before coming to this country. So thank you very much, Denise. Kendra Gaither is going to give us the perspective of the private sector, who usually claims or ask very loudly for better English skills in workers throughout the world, and particularly in Latin America. And finally, Mateo Samper, who is also Colombian, like me, so we love that. And Mateo works for Teach for All, and I'm very happy to have him here because those who have the chance to read the document, we really need to increase the proficiency of teachers themselves before we can increase proficiency for the students. Ariel, I'm going to start with you, and thank you again. You look great. It's like you were here with us. So my first question is for you. Ariel, tell us a little bit about the background of this report, why it is important, and what are the most important takeaways that you want people to understand and work from the report.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Good morning to everyone. I'm sorry I cannot be there with you, but hopefully Skype will allow us to feel together. So we often talk about how important it is to build 21st century skills in Latin America and in the world. And in fact, being proficient in a second language, and in particular in English, is actually a fundamental skill to have in the 21st century. English, as we know, has become the lingua franca, not just in commerce and technology and diplomacy, but also in areas like culture and arts. So no matter in which field you are, being proficient in English makes a difference between being integrated in the world and being a part of a modern world or not. So in this report, we set up as an objective trying to understand to what extent countries in Latin America have made progress in establishing the right policy framework, the right programs to actually enable not just the minority and elite to be proficient in English, but really for the majority of the kids and the population to actually be proficient in English. And that's what we set up to do. Now, the good news is as we tell in the report, is that indeed there's been quite a bit of progress in the region in terms of the number of people, particularly young kids, that are learning English. And this tells us that both governments and families recognize the importance of this issue. And we see this in the number of programs that exist, in the amount of resources that are being allocated, in the interest that has been expressed in many opinion polls on the subject. At the same time, the results are less than ideal. And we see this in the few international tests that exist. They all have limitations, and that's part of the problem. But they do indicate that Latin America lags behind other regions of the world in terms of English proficiency. The same is true with the national tests that, again, have limitations and problems, but the ones that are available show a similar picture. So in this report, we try to fundamentally try to understand the policy framework, to what extent it creates the conditions for an effective approach to English language learning in Latin America. And we looked at, we assessed 10 dimensions of that policy framework. I won't go through them, but I see that you'll have the reports, and in page 3, you have a table that summarizes the 10 dimensions that we looked at. We review a lot of documentation. Catherine spent months and months digging detailed information, interviewing experts across these countries. And indeed, there is quite a bit of progress and a diverse picture, I would say. But perhaps only Chile appears, in our view, to have what we call a comprehensive and well-developed policy framework covering all these 10 dimensions. And Chile has, by the way, was the first country in Latin America that identified this as a policy priority. At the time, Sergio Vitar, a member of the Dialogue and a close friend of the institution, was Minister of Education and put that at the front of the agenda. Now, as I mentioned, there are diverse results across countries and dimensions. I won't go through them, but there's a couple of patterns that are worth mentioning. And in particular, there's two big areas in which we see weaknesses that we believe are quite important. The first one has to do with the assessment of English proficiency. And while countries have defined, for the most part, standards and even developed or agreed on some ways to measure them, in fact, they're not measuring achievement in proficiency in English in a consistent way. And this stands in sharp contrast with the really very impressive progress that Latin America, countries in Latin America have made over the last 10 or 15 years in establishing learning assessment systems more generally. National learning assessment systems, but also participating in international tests, such as, for example, PISA. So this stands in sharp contrast, where the movement from defining things to actually implementing them is where we see a clear gap. The second area of weakness relates to teachers. And the report finds that that is perhaps the key bottleneck for improving English language proficiency at scale in Latin America. And we review a number of issues, but we find that two that are, again, a matter of concern have to do with the measurement of proficiency among teachers, English proficiency among teachers, In the cases in which that is already taking place, it shows bad results or weak results. And the second one has to do with teacher training, in particular with the quality of and the regulatory capacity of the state to influence the quality of teaching of teacher development in at the university level when it comes to English in particular. So these are some of the key findings in the report, which I hope you'll read. And with this, I'm trying to whet your appetite. We conclude with 4 big policy recommendations that are not surprising given what we found in the report. The first one has to do with measurement. And we believe, we're persuaded that in order to really scale up the efforts to achieve English language proficiency, countries in Latin America need to move forward a lot more aggressively and consistently in measuring English language proficiency, both for the students and for the teachers. And this is there's a number of suggestions in the report on how to do that. Second, when it comes to teacher training, preparing better teachers, the action is needed at 2 levels. On the one hand, the longer term will depend on success in the long term will depend on a real reform of how teacher training happens in Latin America. This is true not just for English language teaching, but more generally. But we believe that there needs to be a stronger effort in regulating the quality of institutions that provide that training. But in the short run, that it's a long run effort that needs to start right away. But in the short run, we also need to combine that with more innovative approaches to closing the gap between the growing demand for good teachers and the limited supply. This can be one way of doing that is through blended approaches. In the third place, while in the report we focus very much on the schooling system, we think the challenge of English language proficiency in Latin America goes beyond the schools, and we need to focus more attention to what happens in other places of learning, whether they are at the university level, in academies or non-degree providing institutions, as well as in companies. And this is sort of an area in which the lack of information is quite serious, and that was a limitation we faced in the report. And finally, being the Inter-American Dialogue, we are very much conscious of the benefits of thinking regionally rather than individually at the country level. We think there's great potential and opportunities for synergies for a regional approach to English language learning. This is true in terms of sharing knowledge and investing in R&D, research and development, but also in joint initiatives like sharing teachers. I mentioned blended approaches that may rely on new technologies that may allow teachers in one country to be teaching in another country and things of that sort. So those are, briefly, that's sort of the introduction, the executive summary to the report. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. And I think mentioning the 2 main challenges of teachers' proficiency and second, assessments of proficiency. How can we ensure that kids are learning and we can measure that? I would like to ask Catherine if you can develop a little bit more what you found in your research about these 2 main bottlenecks that you identified.
Yes, so as you mentioned, we view these as the 2 main bottlenecks to improving English proficiency throughout Latin America. So the first one is the insufficient supply of quality English teachers. On a basic level, this is a problem of supply and demand. There is there are not enough teachers throughout Latin America to cover the demand for English language learning. There are both more people interested in English language learning, and there are also policies being developed throughout the region to expand English language learning, both to more students at the secondary level, even at the tertiary level, and then also to reach students at the lower grade levels as well. So the second issue, for that, there's a 20% to 100% need for more teachers of the current teacher supply. The second issue is a weak implementation of the policies regarding teacher quality. So for this is an issue of quality. The teachers lack English proficiency before they even reach their students. There are requirements throughout the region for teachers to have a certain proficiency level. This ranges from the upper intermediate to a proficient level of English proficiency. However, many teachers are entering the classroom with sometimes not even a basic level of English proficiency. This obviously affects the quality that they're able to provide for their students. One country that is doing a good job of measuring teacher proficiency is Costa Rica. In 2008, they measured the proficiency of the majority of their English teachers. They then worked to improve the quality of teacher training to address the issue that not all the teachers were reaching the adequate levels of English proficiency. They then again measured the English teacher proficiency in 2015. At this point, there were 60% of their teachers that reached the adequate levels as required by the ministry standards. However, you can still see that there is still a gap in the number of teachers that are reaching the adequate levels of English proficiency. In other countries, the problem is even more severe. Less than half of the teachers in other countries are reaching the standards for ministry English teacher proficiency. One problem contributing to this issue is a lack of accreditation of the teacher training institutions. This is an issue not only for English language learning programs, but just teacher training institutions in general throughout Latin America. So there are approximately 83% of teachers have certification in one country, which is a pretty high percentage, but in another country, less than 30% have the certification to teach English at the secondary level. And so this obviously creates a problem of both certification and lack of proficiency. Another issue with teacher training is professional development. In the region, there are actually a growing number of initiatives to train teachers through professional development. However, one thing that they're lacking is evaluations of the impact and cost of these programs, whether these programs are actually doing what they're supposed to do or whether it's just costing the countries a lot of money and resources to train teachers. The second issue that we mentioned as a major bottleneck to English language learning is the inadequate measurement of proficiency of both teachers and students. So I'll first talk about teachers, or about students. Many of the countries set proficiency goals for students and for teachers to have a certain level of proficiency when they complete secondary education. Of the 10 countries that we evaluated in our report, 7 of the countries set these proficiency goals based on the Common European Framework of Reference. And you can actually view this on, I believe it's on page 33 of the report. Now, for students graduating from secondary education, they should have a B1 level of proficiency based on the standards or the goals for these 7 countries. At the elementary level, the goals are usually around the A1 to A2 level of proficiency, which is a more basic level of proficiency, which is understandable for elementary students. However, one of the problems here is that they are not necessarily assessing these students to determine whether they are reaching these goals. So countries turn sometimes to international assessments. These are standardized assessments that are used throughout the world. However, a problem with using these assessments is the cost. It is not necessarily achievable to distribute this test to all students throughout Latin America or throughout one's country. Other countries look to develop a national exam. This is problematic in that it takes time and resources. However, it can be a good option for countries to assess their students. Throughout Latin America, many of these international assessments reach just a sample of students, or they only test students at one grade level. This is somewhat problematic, although it's a step in the right direction. Another option, though, that we see throughout Latin America is that some of these exams are created as optional for students. While this is an opportunity for students to prove their proficiency levels and show that they have the necessary proficiency levels, whether they want to study abroad or work in an industry that requires English proficiency, it doesn't give a country an accurate depiction of what the proficiency levels are throughout one's country, and therefore we have a lack of reliable data. There are also teacher assessments throughout the region. Chile provides an example of a country that has a teacher assessment that assesses both English proficiency as well as teacher qualifications to teach English throughout elementary or secondary education. Ecuador is another country that allows for an option to choose from international assessments. So teachers need to certify their proficiency through a variety of, or they can choose from a variety of international assessments to certify their proficiency. However, not all of the countries have these exams, and another issue is that, as we saw before, policies regarding teacher qualifications are not always enforced. This leads to a lack of reliable data as well. Another source of data of international student assessment, or just assessment in general of English proficiency, are these international assessments, such as the English First English Proficiency Index. This is an optional exam that anyone can take online. I believe it's for free. I know there are options for free anyway. But as you can see, if anyone can take this exam, it also does not provide accurate data of whether the country is actually increasing its English proficiency. It really just depends on who's willing to take the exam, which might actually scale the scores upward, as if you know English, you're probably more likely to take an English exam. So again, we don't have a random sample, and we have a lack of reliable data. Ideally, a country would have a nationally representative, internationally comparable exam to measure student proficiency or teacher proficiency in English language learning. So overall, this results in an inability to orient policies and programs. This is a problem for policymaking, as there's no data to tell us which way we need to go, what changes need to be made, what changes that have been made are actually having the desired impact. And so without this reliable data, countries are struggling. They don't know whether the programs that they've already implemented are having the desired impact. And then other countries that are looking to implement English language learning programs don't necessarily know who is a good model to follow. If they look to Chile, well, Chile has an English language learning program. Do we have the data that tells us what components of that English language learning program are actually giving us higher English proficiency throughout the country? And so other countries really need that data to look to develop their own English language learning programs. So these are the two main bottlenecks that we found throughout our research. And without addressing these issues, it's going to be difficult to improve English proficiency throughout Latin America. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Denise, I know the U.S. has been quite involved to the Cultural Office in many programs, from training people, sending people to the U.S., visits to the U.S., etc. And I remember 20 years ago when I did this program, it was quite elitist in the sense that English was usually, people who knew English were from schools that were bilingual and very expensive, mostly from main cities in each country. That has changed quite a bit with the increase of the middle class, etc. More people want to learn English, and I know the US has made an effort to democratize, if you may, their programs throughout the region. Is there anything that you can tell us from the State Department about these bottlenecks, how you're helping, perhaps with teachers training or other programs that will give us some hope to resolve these issues?
Absolutely. We have a whole set of global programs that we use in different regions throughout the world, and they are flexible depending on the different goals we have in each region. Our largest program is called the English Language Access Micro Scholarship Program, and it is a 2-year after-school program for underserved youths between the ages of 13 and 25. And during for each fiscal year, there are about 15,000 of these students throughout the world. So because it's a 2-year program, during any given time, we have about 30,000 of those students. Another one of our programs that sends American English language educators abroad to partner with countries and host institutions is the English Language Fellow Program and the English Language Specialist Program. So we have hundreds of those during any given year, and in Latin America this year we'll be sending 21. And again, what they do, they do a lot of teacher training. They do perhaps projects such as curriculum development or textbook design. It's according to what the need is in the particular region. We also, throughout the world, have 25 different posts where we have what is called a Regional English Language Officer, or RELO for short, and these are English language professionals with the State Department who work with local institutions, local governments such as academic institutions, NGOs, to develop programs to meet the English language needs in that particular region. They also will develop what we call post-specific programs, and some of the ones that are going on or have gone on recently in Latin America, I've got a couple of examples here. So one, English for Coding Camp in Chile, which was for underserved women, and it provides them with English language skills needed to participate in coding classes that will give them the tools to gain employment in the technology industry. One that is going to start, that is starting about now in 2017 in Mexico, is a teacher, a sort of a pilot access program for teachers to teach them the basic English skills. These teachers are going to what is called the Normal. Okay, there it goes. And it will give them basic English language skills over a 2-year period. And I think there are 20 teachers in that. It's a pilot program. Another example of a local program was actually this is a global program, but it's been adapted to local use. We have MOOCs, and we have several of those a year, and one of them was English for journalists. And so in Venezuela, they developed a blended course for journalists in that area. So those are just some of the examples of some of the programs that we have. I think I would reiterate what I think was Ariel said in the beginning, is that we have multiple problems that we're dealing with, and it's such a huge issue that we have, we're struggling just to keep up with such a huge issue. So, thanks.
Thank you so much. Kendra, I think the Chamber of Commerce, of course, here in the US and also in local chapters, are usually very engaged in education issues. And I think representing many businesses, it will be interesting for us to hear what are those businesses required, or what are their comments or requirements in terms of English? What do they say? How do they see the region in terms of English proficiency? If you can give us an overview.
Great, thank you, and good morning, everyone. I am delighted to be here representing the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and just to start at the 30,000-foot level and work to more local levels, I'll start by saying that the Chamber and its 3 million members spends a significant amount of time focused on issues of talent development, human resources, because it's critical to our work. So it's a key focus of the Chamber, not only in the United States, but in our work regionally, as you mentioned, through some of our hemispheric engagement, as well as through our American Chambers of Commerce, of which we have 24 in the Americas region, working in 28 countries. So starting from that 30,000-foot level, I would start by pointing to a quote from our president and CEO, Tom Donahue, who last year, in talking about the work of our Center for Education and Workforce Development, talked about the role of the business community as the primary consumers of the education system. And as part of that ethos, really being incumbent upon the private sector to be also partners in helping to deliver the outcomes that result from education systems. So it's a very critical component of what we do and how we engage. At the regional level, the Chamber has played a role in so doing through the Summit of the Americas, which is a meeting that occurs every 3 years that has both a government level component as well as a private sector or CEO level component. Apologize that this seems to keep going in and out. At some point I may have to switch, but as long as you all can bear with me, great. In 2012 in Cartagena, President Santos invited a CEO summit in collaboration with our counterparts, the National Business Association of Colombia, to elaborate a private sector agenda for the hemisphere. So bringing together the national associations from the various countries across the hemisphere. The U.S. Chamber and our members played a big role in being part of that summit and contributing to what was launched in 2015 through a mechanism called the Americas Business Dialogue to list what were those areas in which innovation and human capital development were really priorities for the community. Within that specific area of recommendation, foreign language and English language was a key priority that was outlined and elaborated. And so we continue from a policy engagement standpoint to work with the Inter-American Development Bank and to work with our hemispheric partners in highlighting the importance of including greater foreign language education and proficiency into the work that is then a charge to all the member governments to continue to implement. I would just step back a bit to point that as an area of interest, this has really grown in the last decade, I would say. About 10 years ago, KPMG did what is considered a seminal report on nearshoring and the attractiveness that Latin America and the Caribbean have for American businesses in terms of its proximity, the time zones, and the opportunities to engage in a growing market and to localize in those markets. And in those studies, it really pointed to how pivotal English language education is for workforce development and growth. There are a number of studies that consulting firms continue to point to as they look at global outsourcing and nearshoring as concepts, and how English language is really one of the 3 most critical factors that companies are evaluating when they're looking to engage in markets. So from a regional standpoint, our America's Business Dialogue has taken a look at that carefully as a competitiveness issue for companies who are looking in the region to expand their opportunities and to tap into a workforce that can really help them to grow given that skill set. Drilling down to the more local level, we do have, like I mentioned, the 24 American Chambers of Commerce that are operating in 28 countries around the region. We have a regional association or in a grouping of those called ACLA. It's a little bit of a clunky acronym, but this week we're actually celebrating the 50th anniversary of this institution, which was founded in part by David Rockefeller and really brought the American Chambers of Commerce to develop a hemispheric agenda for how U.S. business engages in the region. This network represents about 20,000 American companies who are operating and responsible for about 80% of the foreign direct investment in the region. And so as part of that hemispheric agenda, through our AmChams, again, human capital development is a really critical factor, and specifically helping to foment English education in the local markets is a key component that our American Chambers of Commerce or our AmChams do. I'll give 3 small examples that actually track very closely with the countries that are identified in the report and the countries that were studied for the purpose of this discussion. I'll start with Colombia, in part because we have great Colombian representation on this panel, but also one of the hats I wear at the Chamber is as the executive director of our U.S. Colombia Business Council, which was fairly recently launched, and we had a binational business summit that was hosted here in Washington, where the U.S. business community, our CEOs and CEOs from our counterpart organization, UNDI, convened to talk about ways in which we could help the economic relationship between our countries grow. And one of the key issues that was identified, not from the US side, interestingly, but from our counterparts in Colombia, was the importance of English language education and expansion of that possibility because it made the market more attractive. This is something that I would say tracks across the broad hemisphere in that in services sectors in particular, our members in the IT fields, in tourism, in those areas where there's a lot more external engagement, there's a greater need and a greater interest in developing those skill sets. And so in the case of Colombia, in collaboration in our work with our counterparts, and recognizing that both the government has placed a priority on education and English language and a priority on expanding its tourism and its service sectors. This also became a top priority for how we collaborated in that market and how we utilized that interest and the interest of our companies, which also include companies who are involved in education and education technology space, really allow the opportunity to bridge those gaps. Our AmCham in Colombia has also been a very key supporter of that through their corporate citizenship and CSR engagement to provide scholarships, to expand teacher training, as well as student access to English level education. Our American Chamber of Commerce in Mexico has been very actively involved in engaging with local universities and their 3 chapters across the country to be able to, again, as the key consumers of what the education system is producing in terms of human capital, that they're able to be involved and engaged and give direct feedback in that process, as well as offering assessments for business executives to be able to evaluate and assess their own language skills and how that helps them advance in their own professional career. And then the last example I'll close with on a local level would be the work of our American Chamber of Commerce in Chile. Chile's been mentioned a number of times during this conversation, and obviously has achieved the most comprehensive work in terms of English level education. But our AmCham for more than a decade has been partnering with the government when they first started with their English Open Doors program and really emphasizing and working on expanding the opportunities for English level education. About 10 years ago, doing an assessment of the English language offerings in Chile, and then really partnering with the institutions to make those opportunities more broadly available. I'd say from a hemispheric standpoint, just to close out the conversation, one of the things that I would point to as to why this is imperative for the business community and why we are engaged in this from the hemispheric standpoint is that last year, the World Economic Forum in 2016, in one of their reports, pointed to Latin America's massive demographic bonus in that approximately a quarter of the population in Latin America and the Caribbean is between the ages of 15 and 20, and that really does typify and signify the importance of continuing to invest in young people's opportunities and ensuring that there is appropriate educational opportunity, and particularly that foreign languages are a component of that as we look to expand the competitiveness of the region in the ways that our markets can engage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kendra. And in fact, one of the things that the report found is that the population between 18 and 24 years old in Latin America lags behind their peers in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. And that's definitely an issue that will not allow us, perhaps, to take advantage of that demographic dividend. Mateo, you work in the Colombian Ministry of Education, and now you work for a very successful NGO, Teach for All. And one of the things we have heard, wonderful programs, but they are in a way limited in terms of how many people they can reach. From your experience, what do you think will be innovative ways to do English teaching and learning at scale, which is what we really need if we want to make sure that most of the population becomes bilingual?
Thank you, Maria Alexandra. And thanks for inviting me to the panel, Ariel. Hi, hope you're having a good time in Buenos Aires. Catherine, great report. I really enjoyed reading the report. And perhaps I want to start with an anecdote, because in reading the report, I was just taken to Puebla, the state of Mexico. In a visit in my current work, I was I was visiting a community, and as part of that, we were visiting the school. And just want you to imagine for a second, we're in rural Puebla, so this was like an arid and sort of high place. So it's chilly. Poor farmers for the most part. The school is run down. The desks, some of them work, some of them don't. And I'm with a delegation of other colleagues that are speaking. They're all speaking English. I'm one of the few that is speaking Spanish. And we come to talk to one teacher, and we ask him, what do you teach? And says, math, English. And we were like, oh wow, so how are you? My colleagues started saying, and he was blank faced, like, hey, how are you? Completely blank face. He did not speak English, right? He was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then I had to translate, and obviously he did not speak English. And as I was reading the report, I was remembering this. I was like, this is clearly one of the problems, right? From the idea, as Sariel mentioned, to the execution. You have what does this small example anecdote say about the English language learning in Latin America, and what also does it say about how we are allocating resources? So on the first one, I would say, we have over 7 million teachers in Latin America currently, right? And on average, whether you read the PISA reports or literature from the World Bank or from the IDB, on average, teaching quality is low in Latin America still. And it's a big problem, right? Because it's a constraint for making any sort of education progress. So one of the things also that most people agree with is that it's not only about, it's not a fiscal or a technical problem. You might actually be able to teach English skills to a lot of these Puebla teachers, but that might actually not do it, because maybe some teachers really don't know how to teach. They don't have the skills to actually teach a classroom and have their students make a lot of progress. So I think that, as I was reading the report again, one of the things that I was thinking is, how do we obviously teach English, and get the knowledge out there so that more teachers are able to impart the knowledge to their students. English is important, but so is math and so is language, and many kids are falling behind in that as well. And how do we combine it with more broader policies that groom teachers, just to name a few, that groom teachers, that support them, that teach them, that walk with them, how they're doing in the classroom and how they're teaching kids and how they're being incentivized, how they're being motivated to, is it performance or is it years in the job? Is it, there's, it's a broader and more complex issue. The other thing is how are resources being allocated? And I think that's important. And the report actually, I'm going to read a quote from it that just caught my attention. It said, half of all public schools in Mexico City have one English teacher, while there are only present English teachers in 10% of all public schools in Tabasco and Veracruz. So, there you have it. Usually resources are, the best teachers, the more resources are in the cities, but the farther you go and, the bigger the need normally, you have less resources. So we need to ensure, in thinking about English as in ELL, that this is actually reaching the people that need it the most. Things I really liked about the report, and I'll talk a little bit about what I'm seeing from my job and from my experience. One is regional collaboration. I think this is so critical, and I love the report just because of that. It's amazing to see everything in one place, right? And I haven't come across a similar report, and I think this is a great start. I think this is a good place to see whether Colombia has Colombia bilingüe and Panama bilingüe and English. I don't remember the Peruvian or the Chilean; they had the same name. But it's great to see this information in one place, and it's one way to start collaborating, to to kick off that collaboration. How? I mean, we have a universe of organizations here in Washington, to name a few, that can actually take this a notch forward. The IDB, the OAS, PREAL, obviously. So how do we, with the countries that are in the report, the ones that you talk about, and those that are not, how do we begin sharing this information more? And how do we engage with other institutions, NGOs that are working in English language? Mine is not, by the way. Just want to clarify, so that people learn, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, which is an eternal problem in Latin America. And lastly, I would say that going beyond the report and just thinking about the complexities of improving education in Latin America in general, not only English language, I think it's there's just thousands of things that need to be done, right? It's not only that we need to teach teachers how to teach English. It's not only how teachers should be better supporters. It's not only that we should be attracting better teachers. Not only that institutionally we need some more continuity to be able to sustain reforms. It's not only that kids usually those that live in communities that are poor have thousands of other disadvantages that make them lag behind. I mean, whether it's nutrition, health, violence. I mean, you have so many things. So one of the things, and here's the little propaganda about what I'm doing and what I really believe in, is how do you begin taking more and more people? How do you channel the energy of more talented people to work in the broad education system? And I don't mean the Ministry of Education or a school necessarily. I mean, let's look at this more broadly. And how do we channel the energy of young kids graduating, top talent that is graduating from our countries, to go and work in education and in development in their own countries? So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel and Ariel. Before I open for questions, I think you got a very good kind of overview from different sectors, how they see this issue. I think like anything in education is an ecosystem. It cannot be solved just by a school or a teacher or a government. It has to be a combined effort of many, many actors. And in the case of English, that equity access to quality English education applies as equity access to quality education overall. So we have about 10 minutes. I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions, and then we will, if we have more time, we can do, let me start here, then here, and then here.
Yeah? Okay. Is it on? Okay. Thank you so much. This was really interesting. My name is Sarah, and I work at the Global Fairness Initiative. We're an international development nonprofit. And I hear a lot of talk about formal institutions and formal frameworks, but one of our key programs in the region works with NINI, so Ni Estudian Ni Trabajan, nearly 20 million youth across the region who are left out of the economy. 1 in 5 are unemployed, a lot are in informal work. And we've had a lot of challenges with our online platform and blended learning, teaching English. We know that employers want it. We know that we've worked with McDonald's, for example. But it's lack of immersion, it's lack of consistency. Are there any programs that you studied or that you saw in the region that were able to effectively teach English online? And what are some recommendations you may have for this kind of work?
Morning. Alejandro Lara. Grew up in Colombia half of my life, and the remaining 25 years in this area. I'm not going to tell you how old I am right now, but I'm doing research, particularly targeting youth brain development, specifically in Latin America, using the latest neurotechnologies specifically. And also intending to run, setting up a nonprofit, around these issues. Now, I have well, two specific questions. One for Catherine, as far as that data collection. As you know, Latin America is very marked in social classes. It's very structured. And I just wondering, the data collection you did was targeting the public schools or private schools? Because as you know, the ones that can afford private schools, they're going to learn 2 or 3 or 4 languages at the same time. And public schools, they don't have, they lack that access. And also, learning English in a public school is pretty much, it's not sustainable. It's mainly targeting elementary schools at one level, and then they forget about it. Or secondary schools, and they also, after that, they forget about it. It has no practice at all. And at times, what happens is that they don't even know the usage of what to do with it, what to do with the English language.
Sorry, can you go to the second question?
Yes,
please?
and the second one, and I also want to see the view of the panel on this one, including, I'm sorry, I forgot the State Department. In reference to funding, how much of the funding we have for education systems in Latin America. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Kit Yassin. I'm with Education Development Center. We're a nonprofit based here in the U.S. First of all, thank you very much. I agree. This is a really nice report to have, very helpful to any of us working in this field. We, several years ago, were working in Latin America using a methodology that we use to reach about 45 million students worldwide called interactive audio instruction. I'm in Paraguay, and we had worked in Bolivia and several other countries to teach other things. And several ministers over the years have said, this is great, learning reading or writing or reading or math, but can you do this for English? And we had done it for using this methodology for English in other parts of the world. So we developed programs called English for Latin America. And the idea is to reach that majority using audio programs that are interactive, that train the teacher while also reaching the students. So whether you're in La Guajira or Chocó or Puebla or, Quito or wherever you are, if you have an MP3 player and a wind-up speaker, these programs will guide you, the teacher, even if you do not speak English, to teach. And we've included, most recently, if you grew up in the US, you might know Schoolhouse Rock. We did a lot of work. Cabas, a Colombian singer, offered his voice for our theme song with a local group called Thievery Corporation. A lot of actors from everywhere from Hollywood to all over Latin America to produce a sort of novela. So the idea of motivation, getting kids to come to school, learning through culturally appropriate programs, training teachers, and then assessing them was extremely important to us. So actually next week we have a presentation at our offices here, English for Latin America, and we'd be happy to take your information. But the idea is to give ministries a way to reach for something they can actually afford, because while we know that online programs are terrific or volunteers are terrific, they can't go everywhere. Not everybody has electricity even or connectivity. We also have our work readiness or workforce development curriculum integrated in as well, so you're not just teaching in a vacuum. My question is the following. The greatest challenge I found really in speaking with various ministers was speaking ability. And I'd like to ask about that, assessing. I mean, we have an instrument that assesses that on a large scale at a very low cost, but that's really the crux of the matter. Ministers would say, our students might be able to get to the A1 or A2 or even B1 level on a written exam, but that's all we can afford. We cannot afford to assess speaking, and as we all know, that's the most important skill in year 1 of language learning. So can you address that? Did you come across any good instruments that did assess speaking ability?
Thank you. The first question about programs that can be done online. I don't know if who would like to address that one? Catherine?
I'm happy to start. Yes, so one program that I found very interesting is called CEBAL in English. It's a program in Uruguay, and they actually attract teachers from other countries via video conference in order to give English language learning classes to students in Uruguay. So this is reaching a majority of students, both in public and private schools throughout the country of Uruguay. It's actually reaching, I believe, 96% of students in grades 4 through 6. And so these students are receiving quality English courses from both proficient English speakers and qualified English teachers. And so that's one way that you can utilize technology to take advantage of teachers that already speak English in other countries, and they can deliver the classes to the students that really need it in country. So this both utilizes technology and solves the issue of a lack of teachers that we see throughout Latin America.
And that's a program in the public school system, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The second question regarding your data, was it from public or private schools?
Yes, so we tried to focus on both as much as we could. We really did look at the public schools. I do think that it's important that public school students have access to English language learning, as well as the private students. We really need the majority of people working in the Latin American economies to speak English. It can't just be reserved for the elitist students who can access the private schools. And so if we're going to grow the economies and open them up to the English-speaking world, then it needs to reach more than just the private students. So I think the majority of our research focused on the public schools, but we do discuss some of the private schools as well.
Thank you. And Denise, regarding investment in these programs by the U.S. government?
That's hard to say. I can tell you that our office has a budget, a global budget of $43 million right presently. However, there are over 25 different agencies within the U.S. government that deal with English language learning, including Fulbright, which has a English teaching assistant program, Voice of America, Peace Corps. So I can't speak to how much money in the entire budget, but our office global budget is $43 million at this point, which it varies from year to year as well.
And finally, I think a very interesting question about speaking skills and how you measure, because you are absolutely right. Sometimes kids can perform very well in exams, in written exams, but their ability to speak fluently is not there. Any comments on that?
I can touch briefly on this. So we didn't look into this as thoroughly as we probably should. I think it's an important question to address, is the speaking ability of students. So you'll see throughout the report that we do discuss the assessments. First of all, assessment in itself is problematic throughout the region. There is an assessment even of a student's reading ability or writing ability. And so reaching that speaking ability, as you said, it is difficult to assess. I think there are some programs throughout the country that are working specifically toward reaching or improving speaking ability, but I'm not familiar with the assessments.
Thank you very much, Ariel. Everyone, I'm going to leave you with just one ask or call for action is, if you had the chance or have had the chance to read this report, think from the corner of your own world, organization, passion, etc., how you can help solve this issue. And one anecdote, my daughter and I traveled about 3 years ago to Ethiopia. And our tour guides all spoke English, and they all were extremely poor. And I was just amazed of how well they could communicate. And I always thought, maybe they went to a public school, and I asked, a bilingual school, and I asked them, and some of them have never even visited Addis, the capital. And they learn through school. So it's possible to learn in a public school English. And they are in Ethiopia, for Christ's sake. I mean, we are right here. We listen to English all the time. We are by the US as a region. I think we can do better than that. And we owe that to everyone who aspires to grow professionally. So please read the report. Please tell the world about this and help from every corner of your world. I know the Dialogue is doing it. I know Pearson is doing it in issues like assessment, English training for teachers, etc. I think we can all help to advance this issue in the region. Thank you very much for coming this morning, and I hope to see you soon somewhere. Thank you.